All right, well, good evening, everyone. I hope everyone's doing well. Voy a hacerlo en español e inglés para que las personas que no tuvieron la oportunidad de estar con nosotros, con nuestras juntas, se puedan entender lo que está diciendo. Y con eso voy a poner todo en nuestro boletín de la semana para que puedan revisarlo y averiguar exactamente lo que estamos haciendo. So, we're going to be posting this meeting on the newsletter, as well as just making it available for anybody who wasn't able to jump in our meeting. And today's meeting is specifically having a conversation regarding next year, working on our action teams. We have tonight two special guests from Odyssey STEM. We have Wences and Courtney. They are two wonderful teachers over at Odyssey STEM, and they're here tonight to share their experiences and go a little bit more into the advisory model and their experiences with that, as well as tonight our conversation is going to be talking around competencies and looking at how we create a rigorous classroom environment that's yet personalized around each child. Hoy tenemos varias personas que son parte de nuestra conversación. Tenemos a Wences y Courtney, dos maestras que son participando en la escuela de Odyssey STEM, que está dentro de LA Unified. Y ellos están aquí con nosotros y van a estar hablando acerca de advisory y también acerca de clases y cómo hacer trabajo dentro de las clases que continúan haciendo a un nivel alto. Y con eso van a estar participando con nuestra conversación. So I'm going to go ahead and share my slide deck with you tonight. There is a bit of me talking at you. I apologize. And then we'll also do some breakout rooms in which we'll be able to have conversations with each other. It looks like our group tonight is still pretty small, so we can probably have those breakout sessions just among ourselves. So that'll probably be the easiest thing rather than creating another group. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Give me a thumbs up once you see it. Everyone see it? A thumbs up? All right, perfect. Pues vamos a empezar. Our goals tonight, we're going to be doing a check-in, just see how we're doing, any supports that you need as parents, just where are you with the process, with everything. I know it's a lot on your plates right now. You've sort of been placed into the situation of becoming a full-time teacher, in addition to parent and support and everything else that you're already doing. So I know it's a lot on your plate right now. And I just want to just check in any questions you may have at the moment regarding anything with our school. After that, we're going to be reviewing the advisory model, just checking in with regards to that, with the why, who, how often, and what that may look like for next year. Then we're going to be looking into a deep dive into competency-based learning, looking at personalization of student learning, as well as standards, rigor, and individualization. What does that look like in a school environment? Of course, we have Wences and Courtney here with us tonight supporting our conversation. We're going to be reviewing the action teams, and then we're going to be talking about next steps about those. So I have an idea about how to make the action teams work over the next few weeks, and I'd like to share that with you and just get your ideas on your feelings about that. Okay? Hoy vamos a hacer un registro en cómo están, qué apoyamientos necesitan, en qué punto del procesamiento se están encontrando. Si tienen preguntas, sé que son muchas a este punto, y haré lo posible para responder. También vamos a revisar el modelo de asesoramiento y decir por qué y quién y cuándo. Vamos a sumergirte en el aprendizaje basado en la competencia, personalización del aprendizaje del estudiante y también hablando de normas individualización. También tenemos nuestras ayudantes hoy, de las maestras Wences y Courtney. Además de eso, vamos a revisar los equipos de acción y hablar acerca de un horario que vamos a tener las próximas semanas en cual podemos hacer trabajo juntos acerca de cambios del próximo año. Okay? So I know these are really difficult times right now. We're all taking on new roles. I know today I was taking on the role of an administrator trying to do an entire day of meetings over an internet platform that was not working. So today was a wonderful lesson on patience, which I'm not always best at. So I think I'm trying to calm down under all of this. But it's something that we can all do together, and it's definitely just throughout this experience so far, what's really come across is just how strong of a team we have, not only just as teachers, but as students and parents. And I'm so thankful for all of you and the tremendous work you're doing right now. A este punto tenemos tiempos que son muy difíciles y sé que hay un montón de trabajo que estamos haciendo al mismo tiempo. Los estudiantes, padres y maestras están asumiendo nuevos trabajos y con eso a veces es muy difícil hacer todo y aprender cómo hacer todo. Y con eso lo más importante es tener paciencia, y es algo que estoy trabajando de tratar de hacer cada día. Y con eso lo más importante es que todos estamos aprendiendo a hacer esto juntos. Somos en equipo y sí podemos hacerlo juntos, podemos hacer todo. Okay, so si te puedes, you can do this. We're here for you. We're very excited to have you a part of our team. So I just wanted to go over quickly as a start, as well as just a couple of bits of reminder for my parents. Just so you remember, there is a parent newsletter that goes out every week. Please make sure to check in on that. I have gone ahead and just linked these into the to the slide deck, and I'll share the slide deck with all of you. Afterwards, that'll be inside of the newsletter. And that's something where you can check on updates. All of the Zoom meetings are in there. I found it to be simplified in terms of just keeping everything in one page, okay? Tenemos un boletín de padres, o para padres, es un registro semanal para los padres sobre todo lo que está pasando. Y por favor, si pueden comprobarlo y estar viendo todo lo que estamos haciendo, hay un montón de información adentro del boletín, y con eso me pueden tener toda la orden de lo que estamos haciendo cada semana. Also, we have playlists that are being sent out every Monday. Everyone's receiving the playlist from the teachers, I believe, correct? I hope so. Good. All right. And those are assignments for each week. I know that as parents, some of those assignments may seem really complicated or may seem something brand new or very foreign. So if you need support with that, please reach out to your teacher or reach out to me. We're all here to support you. I know it's definitely a lot to figure out in a short amount of time. Tenemos cada semana las listas de tarea que se ven todos los lunes a las 9 de la mañana. Esas listas tienen asignaturas, tienen tareas para cada semana. Para sus estudiantes, para que puedan continuar trabajando con la escuela. Si tienen preguntas de cualquier cosa, por favor, se pueden mandar sus preguntas conmigo, ¿ok? O con sus maestras. In addition to that, we have office hours and advisor support, which is really time for checking with students and parents. I hope all of you have at least had the opportunity to check in with parents, with your teachers at one point this week already, and just being able to check in with regards to any questions you have. And with that, if you ever need anything from me, please go ahead and send me an email. And you can, of course, do a one-on-one with me if you have any specific questions about anything at all, okay? Cada semana tenemos apoyo de los consejeros, horas de la oficina, y es hora de conectar con los estudiantes y los padres, por favor. Si no han hecho eso, si pueden conectar con sus maestras y también si necesitan tiempo conmigo, uno a uno, se pueden hacerlo, por supuesto, soy aquí a su orden, okay? Perfect. Well, a couple of other things just before we get going into questions that you may have at this point. Just a reminder that our next Action Team meeting is May 7th, which is in 2 weeks from today. And what that does is it allows us to have enough time for next week to really focus in on our action teams, and I'll be sending out more information on that. Our next meeting will be about, what is it called? Oh my gosh, the word, I'm forgetting. Going out and meeting with jobs is called having internships. Internships, we're doing life experiences, opportunities, all of that, and working through it. At the end of a day of meetings all day long, your brain starts to lose words. So I'm right there, I apologize. La próxima junta que tenemos es en 2 semanas, el 22 de abril. Es una junta acerca de trabajo adentro de la comunidad, que pueden conectar con trabajos y afuera de la escuela y cómo podemos hacer eso de manera efectiva. Okay? So I just wanted right now just to have a quick moment before we get going into all the information tonight to just see if there's any main questions that you may have, any main concerns or needs at this point. And it can be really about anything. It doesn't have to be about next year things. It can be about right now, any main questions that you may have. And just a reminder, a couple of icons on the bottom of your screen. I'm always saying this to parents, just to remind, but you have the mute button. Just unmute yourself if you want to speak. And the other one is the chat button. And you can please, you can write your questions.
I do have one.
Perfect. Yes.
What is actually, you know, I attend all these meetings and listen. What is actually getting accomplished?
Good question. So right now, a lot of this is working through what are the things that you want. In the background, I'm working with the teachers and getting all of it prepared and set up for next year. So in terms of what's getting accomplished right now, the main thing, the main priority is the day. What's going on in the day for the students? What does that look like? How do we do that? Other things that we're accomplishing in the background, because remember the charter starts in 2 years. Next year it's really the TK8. That's my sole focus right now. is the hiring process for new teachers, looking into other supports I'm needing, thinking about curricular structures, thinking about, you know, timings, all those sort of things that's being worked out in the background to make sure it's done. So my goal is that by the end of May, we can present to you parents a pretty much, here's a rough, almost ready to go outline of what next year is looking like for your 6th, 7th, and 8th graders.
So are
So
you
that's
just,
working in the
oh,
background.
sorry.
Yeah, sorry.
So are you just taking like, are you just taking suggestions and input at this point from the parents and then kind of making a model of what you want to present in for now? Or like what is the actual process being done for the background themes?
The background information right now, and I'm going to go more into that in the conversation once we get into the action team part. But right now, the main focus is presenting the overview information to get parents all on the same page, as many as I can, with regards to the reason and the background and the main information. So remember, we talked about advisory, which is a huge one in terms of understanding the model, right? Another big one is the competency-based education and understanding individualization and personalization, right? That's a big one. The next big one, which is the next conversation we're having, is about leaving to learn, really understanding world of work, understanding context within the community. And then the one after that, which we have to work through, is the structure of the actual day and what that may be. So my hope is that when we have that conversation, we can present to you as this is a almost there thought process for next year. However, we need your input on what's going on. The parts that I have not figured out, right, and this is where I refuse to do this without your input, are the timing for the day, right? All of the main things, you know, the electives, you know, what are the main areas that you want students to be working on? The parts that you as parents put in as your passion areas, those are the areas I want to be including your word on everything we're doing, right? So there's a lot of design work to be done yet, right? But I've been meeting with my, my teachers every other day in terms of designing out the sort of the structures from a teacher and student point of view for making this work well. Okay, but we'll go more into that in a little bit, just when I have a conversation on the action teams, we can talk more about that too. But excellent question, yes. Any other questions just about right now or regarding next year, anything like that before I get going?
I have a quick comment
Yes,
on resources. I just found out that Maestra Rodriguez, Crystal Rodriguez, our resource teacher, she's back from maternity leave, and she's available for everybody basically. She added herself to the majority of the Google Classrooms. So I just wanted to put it out there for parents that also are struggling with the playlist and or just need. She even said if you just need me to read a book, you know, or go through homework or whatever it is, she's available.
Perfect. Ms. Rodriguez is awesome. She really is a wonderful support. So if you have any students with any needs, and that doesn't have to be, you know, great needs or little needs, we really want to support all of them. So just make sure to let us know, talk to your teachers. We really want to make sure that you're being supported during this time. Okay, well, I'm going to get going and continuing our conversation. I don't want to hold you here until 10 p.m., but we'll start talking and then go forever. So I'll do my best to be to the point. All right, so the last time we had a conversation was going over the advisory model, and we had an overview of advisory. Ms. Bowden, just to go over your main point, this is one of the main components of any sort of big picture school and any sort of environment, you know, in terms of really getting to know students. And this is really the idea behind this is why advisory? We really want to create something where students are known. We want there to be a place where teachers develop relationships with students, where students really feel like they have somebody who is close to them, who understands their needs, who understands their goals, and is able to support them throughout their learning process. We talked about how many times when students go into middle school and high school, they become a number and just one of many people, right? And so what makes it very difficult in that situation is that they aren't known and they aren't personalized, and there is nobody who's really there for them on a constant basis. So what we had a conversation about is we have to think of the student in the middle of everything, and all of the other parts are people who are revolving around the student to make sure that that student is being supported. We then talked within the advisory model about the 10 expectations, right? And talking about how there are different ways that we really want to support students. And those 10 expectations, if we remember, we're talking about play and timing and having time for students to work through things, having the ability to practice, having choice in our assignments, being able to build relationships, having authenticity in the work we do, that there's relevance, that it really is something that makes sense, right? That it's challenging for our students, and then also that we can apply our learnings to the world around us. And this was sort of the overview of the expectations when we think about the advisory model. Then we talked about, in more specifics, what is the advisory? So remember, it's a relationship-based process. Students are at the center of the learning, and then advisors, their role is to support students to develop the abilities, skills, and really dispositions that lead to their own learning, right? We want to make sure that we use restorative approaches, that we move between instructor and guides, and that it's really something where we think about support, progress, and understanding versus completion, right? And this is a key when we start thinking about competency-based learning, is we really want to think about supporting students and understanding their progress towards a goal and understanding how we can support them to be successful in each of their understandings and each of their goals. So from there, we just then had a discussion regarding how is maybe this, different for you, for your kids, for other families. How can this impact our students, and what messages do we want our students and teachers to be conveying to each other? So the advisory model is now in full force district-wide, which is kind of fun, because this distance learning platform has sort of forced our conversation to move quickly in terms of the advisory, in terms of really understanding our students. I've had a lot of conversations with teachers and with parents about how can we continue sending kids to a school where they don't know them well. And they've been really thankful that teachers are shifting the model around really having personalized conversations around kids. So what I'd like to do right now is just have a little bit of time for us to just share out any questions you have at this point about advisory, because we've been going over this several times. And I also wanted to just give an opportunity for Courtney and Wences, if you'd like to jump in on that conversation, to share your experiences with the advisory model, and specifically around how you've been able to create an environment that is truly built around building relationships with students. So what questions do you have, parents, right now regarding the advisory model? And I'll allow Courtney and Wences also to answer any questions that are coming through. Maybe to help a little bit with that, Courtney, how would you describe your advisory model? What is it that your advisory looks like? How does a day feel like for a student in your advisory?
We're a family. It's kind of the best way I can describe it. I mean, I think that what is really special about the advisory model is a couple of things for me. So I attended a comprehensive high school, like a big comprehensive high school myself, and I taught at 2 before I came to Odyssey 2 years ago. So going from that environment where my caseload was like 200 to 250 kids, to having a much smaller caseload and a very small advisory of 23, it really has allowed me to get to know them in a deep level, and to support them in all areas of their life. Like, you kind of, as an advisor, you become like their point person or their advocacy person. So I am engaged with the families and helping connect with the school, and I'm engaged with the scholars and helping them connect with other advisors, and I'm engaged with helping them build and design personalized learning experiences and passion projects, and making sure that those experiences get in front of another advisor to be assessed, right? So that all of their learning is captured in a meaningful way. So you kind of act as like their first point of contact within the school. And of course, all teachers are there for all kids all the time, as much as we can. But having that smaller group that we really are advocating for allows us to do our job at the best possible quality that we can.
I love that. Courtney, a question that's coming through is about when, part of the structure of your school environment, do students have choice between advisors, or is it different in terms of what your relationship is with students? Because I know that there will come up with middle school students and high school students that, I don't like her, or I don't like him. I'd rather have somebody else. What does that look like as an advisor in that role?
Yeah, I mean, I think that at one point in the last 2 years, because I've had the same kids for the last 2 years in my advisory, they have probably all really liked me and they've probably all really hated me. And that fluctuation of relationships, I think, is really important, right? Because a lot of times we can't quit a job because we don't like our coworkers. We can't quit a job because we don't like our boss. But what we can do is try to understand them and get to know them on an empathetic and a human level and learn how to make it work, right? And there's opportunities within our school for plenty of other deep relationships, but that relationship you have with your advisory is a special one. And even if they're people that they get on your nerve or you disagree with them, we work through those issues with restorative practice. And I think that our school community benefits from not always placing people where they want to be placed, right? Because a lot of times, especially for kids, like they're just learning how to handle themselves, right? In these sort of conflicts, and whatever support we can give them as advisors and understanding their role in making things right, making things comfortable, and making things tolerable, I think is really important.
Perfect. Wences, maybe you can answer this next one, but we were playing around with, having the same advisor from 6th, 7th, and 8th. At this point, having the same advisor K through 8 probably doesn't make a lot of sense yet, but 6, 7, 8 probably would, and then specifically in the high school model, we would want that advisor to continue with them. Wences, what would you say is the value of having the same advisor with students each year, or what is the thought process there?
I personally think that it's a very important thing to consider, because in running advisories beforehand at a different site, the students were always seeking to switch around. It's one of the reasons why I wound up in my last year at that school. I had 120 students in my advisory, which was insane. I think that to point out or highlight Courtney's point of like, you're not always going to like me, especially like myself. Like the first thing you see is like, oh, okay, this guy looks kind of mean. Especially when I'm thinking, I have that face where I'm not smiling, I'm processing things, and they look at me like, oh man, this guy is going to try to eat me. And it takes some time to warm up. But if they notice that I'm consistent and genuine throughout, and I'm the anchor, and I'm not only relying on myself, but I'm relying on other advisors. Like it's beautiful. Like today, we were evaluating some of the exhibitions that our scholars did, and we were just going back and forth as advisors and communicating about our scholars, and they're my scholars as well. But I know that they have a very strong foundation and someone to rely on when they have Courtney or Gail or any of the other advisors. And that consistency, I think that sometimes we take it for granted, but to know that they have that one person throughout their like middle school or high school experience, it speaks into their lives quite a bit. I think it's extremely important. And obviously it's not perfect. Like sometimes you will have to switch people or scholars, but for the most part, it's extremely beneficial.
Perfect.
And I think too, just to add on to Wences' point, like having the same young people for 2 years in a row, like I have such a strong understanding of their strengths and their areas of growth. And I've really seen them at their best and I've seen them at their worst. And that knowledge of someone, over the course of multiple years really allows me to be like the best possible advocate for that kid as I can be.
Right. And I think that's the bottom line in all of this is we don't want to send our students to an environment where they don't have an advocate, right? And I can think of each of your students. It would break my heart to send them somewhere where they aren't known, right? And I think, just thinking about Caden right now, this week he had the opportunity to share his skills with the entire school. Why? Because people know him, right? And people care about him and love him. And I think that's the main fear that comes from myself and all of us is, if we were to create something where students are not known, then that isn't appropriate. That isn't what we want. We want to have something where students are known, they're loved, they have relationships with people who really care about them. So I think what's really struck me about Courtney and Wences in their classrooms, and I went by there just, really pretty quickly in terms of the, proximity of their year, their students knew them and their students cared about them, right? And I think that was something that was really special for me to see. So a pretty cool thing to look at. If we move into the next part, and parents, I just want you to think about this as we develop out our conversations. One of the main points that I had with my teacher team today, as we were thinking through, some structures for next year, were our non-negotiables. And this is something I'm going to be sending out as a survey to parents probably tomorrow. And this will be to all of our parents. In developing out next year, what would you say are your non-negotiables? And then this was something that we talked about in terms of our teachers, where at first and foremost was the advisory, right? We really want to have a situation where students have time to build relationships and have time to really develop those relationships out with not only each other, but with an adult who knows them. Another big part of it, just because of our school being a dual language school, is Spanish. We have to make sure that we continue our Spanish at a high and rigorous level. Another component was math. We want to make sure that our students are growing in their math skills, and this is generally a component in education that usually is done on its own. Math is pretty linear, and so that makes it more of an on its own type topic. We also want to make sure that we have global awareness, cultural, ethics, humanities, being able to connect oneself with the world, probably through an approach like TEDx or something along those lines. A lot of the teachers were saying they really wanted to continue thinking through computer science and coding in the middle school level. A big issue that we've been having, right, is that when students in Bostonia and head off to Greenfield, it seems that the computer science and coding sort of drops off. So in our opinion, it really needs to be something that continues. We really want project-based learning scenarios, student choice and independence. We want to think through what electives could be like, and electives in the sense of personalizing those to children. Creating independent study options, PE options, external learning opportunities, WOW opportunities, and really being able to design classes around them. And that's something that I really want to be able to think about. What is it that we have for students in terms of their future, and what is it that we really want for them? So I just wanted to show you that in terms of something that teachers are working on today, and it'll be something I share with all of you tomorrow. I think Courtney wins this. The question that just came in from Ms. Bowden is really a very good question, and this is something I'd like to bring up to both of you, because I know many of my parents really are wondering through this. If you notice a child needing to be evaluated for IEP services, our advisor is going to advocate for them to receive those services. How do you approach students with special needs? What might that look like in your classrooms? And Courtney Wences, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. I was giving Wences a chance to go first. We're just trying to be polite to each other. Wences, you go first.
Okay. So the actual format that advisory offers is that specialized and individual attention. So the beauty of it being a smaller group, you are meeting everybody at their own level, and you can see what needs they have or what they don't need. And we work alongside the administrators and our social worker to get those services for them. So we're in there with the IEP meetings, or if we need a preliminary test, we can advocate for our scholar. But ultimately, it depends on the parent to accept that or not. But we can, like, let's suppose the worst case scenario that a parent rejects it and says, no, there's no test needed for IEPs. My wife was a special ed educator for close to 19 years. And sometimes you get parents that say, you know what, we're gonna keep our child on this track. What happens with this format is that you're now able to meet that scholar at that level, and then they offer them multiple entry points into whatever content that they're being presented. That's like the worst case scenario, but for the most part, we're along them. They're working with the RSP teachers and instructional aides, and we're trying to not accommodate, but to meet their needs where they're at. I hope that answers the question.
So I guess my fear is that, you know, unfortunately in some districts, kids kind of fly under the radar because it's taking resources, right, from the school, from the district, in order to provide these IEP services. So if I could see something come out of this advisory position, it would be, you know, more kids receiving these resources and not being flown underneath the radar. So, and I know it's kind of hard for some teachers to go to, you know, other teachers or to say, hey, and advocate for those kids because it is taking resources, right?
Yeah.
So there's kind of a fine line between a teacher.
But not in this. at least my experience in this model, it hasn't been the case, because with the advisory model, you are their champion, and you are the one that they haven't experienced enough yet. And you, as an educator and as an advisor, that's one of your responsibilities, to make sure that this human being that's before you, that even though they're a scholar, they're still a human being,
Right.
and there's much more complexity to them. It's your responsibility to make sure that their needs are being met. And because of the model that you're able to individualize the attention, you can address any complication that comes your way.
So do you feel that you're able to express that and not feel any kind of, reprimand, any kind of disdain towards you, saying, hey, look, I think this child may need speech. I think this child may need, occupational services or.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I don't feel like
Okay.
I have to hide from that. I mean, part of being, like, when we go by first names, I noticed last time there was a question of, like, there's a loss of respect and this and that. It's perceived in that way, but I'm Hispanic, and my tradition is, like, you address everybody as Mr. or Mrs. or Señor or Señora. But I realized throughout this entire experience that they see you as the go-to person that is always going to be willing to listen and offer the opinion and advice that is best suited for them. And because of that, in our particular site, transparency and vulnerability are kind of highlighted. They're not seen as a weakness. They're seen primarily as, like, if you need something, we're there as a community to meet those needs. Because I wish I had the personality of, like, Courtney, where she's like, she can fill up a room in that sense. But there's my weakness, but I can always see it there. And if I need to address it, or I need to lean on somebody else, I know that they're available for that. So because that's, like, at the forefront, like, hey, your vulnerability and your transparency are there, you feel free to express yourself in that way and advocate for that scholar.
Yeah, and I would also add that I know we have competency-based stuff to get to talk about, but I also think that in a traditional classroom model where you're seeing kids only in the context of your content area. So if I'm only seeing kids in math, for example, I'm a humanities teacher, so maybe I'll say English. I would only know how to advocate or support that kid in my area. But the advisory model really breaks open, like, subjects and really focuses on getting to know a human as a human and advocate for them in whatever way that looks like. So I think if I was only seeing a student in the context of English, I might not have the context to be able to go to their math teacher and be like, hey, I think they need support collaborating with their peers, or their science teacher and being like, hey, they struggle with collaboration. Can you pair them with these 3 kids? Because that's who they work really well with. Like, it suddenly gives you an in into their life and what makes learning work for them. And you just feel empowered as an advisor. You're like their protective mama bear or papa bear to go out and be like, yo, Wences, they need help with this thing in math. They talked about it with me today. You need to do this. And it's like, they're your kids, you feel like a protection for them and a willingness to go out on a limb for them, because they're 15 and they don't know how to go out on a limb. So you as an adult go out on the limb for them and you show them what that looks like. So I think the advisory model doesn't allow anyone to fly under the radar, whether they need IEP services, whether they need to be pushed, like, past, what's meeting. There's, like, no radar to fly under because everyone's right there every day.
Courtney and Wences, I know that you both came from, I would say, more traditional schools, right? In the sense of how they're run. Was this a huge jump for the two of you in terms of becoming champions for kids? What was that feeling when you started going to more of an advisory model?
I think for me, it was an easy transition. I think if you like kids and you want to support them, this is, like, the ideal space, because you're not tied down to a content area. You're tied down to a kid, and you're able to look at them more holistically and look at the way that they learn outside of the classroom and inside of the classroom and in extracurriculars and with their friends. And suddenly you're inspired to see them as a person who's learning every day in all these different ways. And that, for me, is like the root of why we teach. Right? We don't teach because we love math, or we don't, I mean, maybe some of us do, but we don't teach because we love our subject. You know, we teach because we love kids. And advisory lets you support them and love them in the way that allows them to get better.
Yeah, the hardest part was for me going from a place where like I was the minority, where like, oh, I'll go above and beyond and do all these different things. Yeah, I'll take on these 100 kids for one class for 3 hours at a time. I got it, you know. Going from that to like, oh wow, like now I have my peers are equals in that sense, and a lot of them are much better than I am. And part of it is like, okay, that was my biggest adjustment. It's like, okay, everybody's on the same kind of philosophical plane here, and we can do this. And I'm a product of Paramount Unified, which is where the district is, and I never experienced that as a student. So I have like both experiences in that sense, as an educator in a traditional model and as a student, and then now this model as well. So that was the biggest transition for me, is like, it took me a while to then believe like, okay, they're on the same page. That's a beautiful thing to see.
Winston, while you're still on it, Kennedy had a question regarding your process for matching students to advisors at the beginning, or assigning to advisors. What did that look like for your team?
For us, the way that I understand it is that now this actually works out to our benefit, because this is my first year at Odyssey, and this is Courtney's second year. So from what I understood is that the team reassessed and saw certain things, and of course the model is not for everybody. So the individuals that left, they had to do a really difficult job, which I commend them for. They had to get this group of advisory kids and scholars, and what do we do with them? It's traumatic to lose your advisor. What do we do? So then from what I understand, is that they separated the students or the scholars in such a way and in cohorts so that they wouldn't feel so much of the pain. And then I think that the administrators were also cognizant of the fact of like, okay, this teacher or this advisor has this kind of experience, and this one has this kind of experience. So these group, they really thought it out, and they matched, like they did a matching game of like, this would be perfect for this personality, and this would be perfect for this advisor. And it turned out where like, yeah, there's some hiccups, but for the most part, you're able to rely on each other and make that transition. So it wasn't as traumatic as you would expect for our scholars. Did they suffer a loss? Absolutely. But we were all aware of what we had to do to help them through that transition. So yeah. Kennedy, it takes a lot of communication.
That was very helpful. Kennedy, and I think that would be the example of, let's say an advisor had to leave for some reason and work through that. And that's something where the point is not just throwing kids out to the wind. It's really thinking intentionally about what is the best fit for them, with whose personality, with whose situation. And that's really a very keen part of what we're looking into. For next year, something just to be aware of that I'm playing around with is the idea of having students matched based on RIASEC letters, having them based on personalities, having them based on ways of really having student connections be strong. And that's something that we can work through as a team in terms of thinking through what would be the best way to set up those middle school classrooms. It's similar to when we think about how we set up elementary classrooms, right? We don't just throw students into a classroom and just hope for the best. We really take time and think through what are the best dynamics within the classroom, needs, even the personalities of the teachers, what would be a good fit for helping students be successful and be happy. I think that's the bottom line, and really something that we want to work through in really supporting our students. Perfect. Thank you, Courtney. And if everyone can see in the chat room, Courtney's adding some more notes on that. Perfect. So if we don't mind, we're going to continue then into competency-based education and thinking about education that is personalized to students and thinking about how to do that in a way that's really adhering to student needs, right? And what that may look like. So I wanted to show you a quick video that I think is a pretty good overview. This video is of a middle school. I just wanted to give you a feel for it.
This gives you the final video pitch. Why does the problem you chose matter to you, and how will solving it improve society?
To me, when we talk about competency-based education, it's really just when you hit that mark or that level, then you move on or you move up in your education.
It's giving the learner the ability to demonstrate their depth of knowledge and skill, their understanding of a competency. It's a real-world application of their knowledge.
Competency-based education is about the skill, not about the grade. I think a lot of times students, parents, and teachers focus on the grade. They don't necessarily focus on the learning that's involved in that grade.
And my topic is how to make makeup less harmful to the skin. I have bought products that have broke out my skin, made it burn, and I'm just trying to figure out what is in the makeup that actually makes my skin break out and burn.
Students have the ability to show competency in so many different ways. It's not just answering a multiple choice test. They can show competency by building a model of something. They can draw blueprints that show something. They can design their own investigation to show something.
And so they get to dive deep into a subject that is meaningful to them. And I think that it boosts their engagement. And I think as a teacher, it really helps me learn about them in a more in-depth way as well.
What we see from our students is something very unusual in terms of their level of engagement, inspiration, commitment to their work.
I think just some of the skills that they're going to take away from this are things that they're going to use beyond, for me, 8th grade science. These are things that they're going to use on job interviews when they, maybe apply to colleges. That communication piece, being able to explain your thoughts.
They're learning how to work together in groups. They're learning how to communicate with each other and give critical feedback. They're learning, how to think for themselves and ask questions and do sustained inquiry.
I have a lot more freedom to do what I want to do.
I like that I get to pick my own topic and am able to research what I'm passionate about.
You get your own creativity. You get to bring your own ideas into this instead of being glued down to a writing project where you have to write an essay. Now you get to express yourself through a project that might help the world in some way.
Perfect. So the idea of competencies is really going beyond what you see in a typical classroom. And if you see how most traditional schools focus on education, they treat standards as the ultimate level of knowledge, right? That if a student hits a standard, you probably have heard of as parents, standard-based education, right? That is the ultimate way of showing that students are actually understanding something and actually acquiring knowledge. And what research is showing is that that's really not true, right? We have to be able to think of the whole student and think about what are the parts of the student that are truly going to be needed in order to be successful in a future world of work, right? And so the idea with competency-based education is it approaches it based on different thinking strategies. And Winston and Courtney, you can probably chime into this in just a little bit about how you approach it at your school, which I know Keith does a great job. But that's regarding, communication and collaboration. How do we communicate with others? What does that look like? How do we create respectful communities where students are able to communicate in a strong and passionate way? There was an article out of, I believe it was Google a few years ago, that was talking about STEM. And they said, please do not send us any more STEM students. We need people who can actually communicate and can actually get a point across. And they said, we have plenty of people who can, plug and chug numbers. A lot of those people are not able to communicate a thought with each other, and so nothing gets done. So it's really valuable to be able to have people who can communicate and collaborate with each other. We need students who are able to be capable of empirical reasoning, where they're able to see phenomena, generate questions, arguments, design, investigate, and think about, what those questions and arguments may have a role in with regards to society at large. We want to think about quantitative reasoning. We want to think about, how can we take these ideas and justify thoughts and generalize understandings and solve real world problems. And this is something where when we think about, let's say, for example, a science experiment, we want to take that outside of just here's a standard that we're hitting, which is NGSS 1.2, whatever, right? And think about, here's a real world issue that's coming up that we care about as students. How are we going to use our thinking strategies and empirical reasoning and quantitative reasoning and being able to communicate that with the world around us, right? We want social reasoning. This is a really interesting one in that we're able to understand diverse perspectives, engage with critical issues of past and present situations to examine their impact on society, understanding local, state, world policies to become active participants in what's going on in our communities. And when we think about our students and think about Cajon Valley and think about the needs around our community at large, we want our students to be able to have an active voice in what's going on. So when we're designing out classes, designing out structures for the day, which Ms. Bowden, you were mentioning, this is exactly what we're having to think about, is what does that look like and how can we use that in a way that's effective? And then finally with this is personal qualities. And I think this is something that Courtney and Wences were already talking to, is that you have to be able to support kids in growing as individuals and growing about who they are as people. And I think this is probably the most important part, which is that they grow in terms of understanding who they are as a person, understanding their sense of self. And this is something that is key when we think about the world around us and the needs that we have currently. We need more people who can actually say that they understand what they are about, that understand their dreams, understand their goals. And that's really what we're trying to do in developing this out. So a good way of thinking about this is when you think about assessments, when you think about authentic learning and understanding, it's not about being able to solve a specific problem that has zero connection to the world around us. We want to be able to create authentic assessments that allow students to share their achievements, learning potential, and understandings while staff can assess development and application of student knowledge, personal qualities, and skills. We want there to be a collaboration with what's going on. So one thing I hope that you're going to be noticing in all of these conversations is it's going to start feeling very cyclical, right? That everything is sort of in a cyclical pattern and that it all connects one to the other, right? You're going to have student competencies that connect to advisors, and advisors are checking in on those competencies, which also have to do with how they approach their learning styles and their world of work, and also approaching their internships and learning experiences. But it takes the advisor who connects with that to be able to make it happen, right? So it's just constantly going back and forth with regards to how we approach competencies and what that may look like. Courtney and Wences, how do you approach competency-based learning at your school site? What would you say is the reason for why your school does that versus just a standards-based approach, which you find in traditional schools?
I can go ahead and start. I am such a geek about competency-based assessment these days. Like it brings me so much joy because, well, let me start with like a little anecdote. So today we were having a conversation, me, the humanities perspective, Gail, a STEM perspective, and Alice, a math perspective. And we were looking at a project that a student had designed on their own. So it was like a personal passion project. They picked the topic, they picked what they wanted to investigate, how they wanted to investigate it, and they went through the learning process and presented us kind of with this piece of learning. And we went through on kind of a scavenger hunt to try to identify what were they doing during that experience. What sorts of skills, what sorts of thought processes were they going through as they did that research and as they wrote that write-up and as they designed that visual presentation. And we documented that and we said, look, Christopher, we see you doing X, Y, and Z. And for the next project, we want you to focus on growing in these 3 ways. And that conversation is no longer about what do you know versus what do you not know, but it's more about the kid and how can they grow and develop their skills and their understanding of the world around them as it relates to things that they're interested in. And to me, competency-based assessment really allows you to cater learning in an individualized way to the young person in front of you. So to me, if I was designing a new school, no matter where it was, no matter who the kids were gonna be, this model is like high on my priority list as important for the future of education. Because it gives kids opportunities to show their learning in and out of the classroom in a way that helps them feel empowered and helps you as a teacher better understand who they are, what they know, and what they need to do next.
And I know as parents, when you're hearing about, there's a lot of lingo that goes around right now. So this is the reason why I'm spending some time just talking about competencies, because this will be something that you hear about a lot moving forward. And each time we meet, we'll go a little bit more in depth. And I hope you notice that we've been going over advisory each time. I think you've all got a pretty good idea of what advisory is about now. And then we'll get to that point with competency-based education as well. And the reality with competency-based education is, it's really understanding students are on a spectrum of learning, right? That can't be defined in a moment, right? And that's something that we continuously are growing in terms of understanding of kids. So Wences, how would you say, you know, in that competency-based approach, do you understand how students are doing? How are you able to keep a high rigorous environment with competency-based education? What does that maybe look like for you?
It redefines assessment and grading. What it does is it's more of like you're nourishing like the soul of the individual. And I know it sounds like, oh man, he's drinking that Kool-Aid and it's really, really, really sweet. But I'm an old man, so I go to stories, you know. So today we were assessing a project of one of our scholars, and her first goal was in collaboration. One of her competencies was in collaboration. I'm talking about Miranda. And she wanted to just be able to speak to people and communicate, because she's really great when she's with her peers, and she's bubbly, and she's a really great personality. But when she's confronted with new situations, shuts down, hides behind her hair, runs the other way. So that was her goal. I'm going to pick up mentorship at a preschool. My mentor is a preschool teacher, and I want to just be able to communicate with these little kids. They're so cute. All right. She did all this work, and then she didn't realize that she was coming up with like a statistical model. And we're in statistics right now, and this is probably like 2 months after she started this project. And now it's the real world nourishment application. I ask parents a lot. It's kind of like it's a pet peeve of parents, especially since I'm a parent myself. What do you remember from high school? Number one answer, friends, or lack of friends, right? So this is she's now able to get this. She started so simple, and then she turned it into this huge thing where she now can apply what she's learning in math, a statistical model, and she can apply it to what her research that she did. And she developed a lesson for them and a way to test these kids, these students, and she gathered all this data, and now she's able to apply what she's learning in the class into her own personal, and it's relevant for her. So competency-based is that. Now we go behind the scenes, and sometimes they're not able to see it, and we put on blinkers and little spotlights for them, like, hey, did you maybe could have noticed this? And then you see it, like their eyes like just get wider, and they're like, oh. And that's where the competency-based grading comes in, or the evaluation piece comes in. You're leaving it, it's fluid and it's scary, especially for a teacher, because now you have to be aware of all of it. But that's what makes it fun, because now you're adding this storyline that's not defined by a test. It's defined by where is this scholar at, and more likely than not, a lot of them far outreach their own expectations. I hope that makes sense.
Thank you. That was super well put. I think that's the key there, is it allows students to move beyond what is normally, here's what's stuck, right? Students typically feeling that they're only able to do certain outputs. This allows them to go sky's the limit. Courtney, there is a question that just came in, 2 questions actually that are really good questions. Would you mind answering Ms. Bowden's question about the idea of how do you prepare students for life, right? With regards to testing and what that looks like. I think this is an excellent question, especially right now with regards to all of the, flux that's up in the air regarding SATs and future tests that come through and all of that. So how would you approach that question, Courtney?
Yeah, I love that question, because that's a question that I had a year ago, and I've reflected on multiple times in the last 2 years and since coming to Odyssey, right? As a teacher, when you take a jump to go to a new way of thinking about education. Same thing with the family or a parent, right? It's a big risk, or at least it feels like it. And it's scary. And so posing these big questions is really important. And coming at it from a teacher perspective, this model is a little weird. It takes a while to learn as a kid. It takes a while to learn as a parent. It takes a while to learn as a teacher. But once you understand it, you understand fundamentally what it means to learn something for the first time. And understanding how to learn something is a better skill than understanding how to take a test. Because once you understand how to learn something, you can apply that to taking a test. But if all you ever learned was how to take a test, you miss the richness of learning something deeply, investigating it, and revising it. Like, to go off of Wences's point, you know, my own experience in high school, I think back to it and I'm like, dang, I don't really remember a lot of what I learned, but I scored well enough to pass. You know, I was good at taking those tests and writing those essays. But understanding with detail and authenticity the content that you're interested in and how to get those answers will prepare you to take tests better than practicing taking tests will. So I think that when our kids leave us and they go to college, they're going to have an incredible leg up on their peers because they don't just understand how to take tests or write essays. They understand how to investigate, how to collaborate, how to communicate, how to really interrogate the world around them in a way that will serve them in figuring out, you know, what that looks like to apply that into a college classroom or into a trade school or into a job.
And Courtney, I'm sure a question will come along these lines as well. That does not mean that your students do not take any tests, correct? By moving this way.
Correct. We also write essays all the time, right? I'm a humanities teacher, so we're writing a lot of essays, and they're understanding the fundamentals behind those rigorous tasks as well. It's not just like a free-for-all party where everyone hangs out and just picks what they want to do every day, right? There is like rigor mixed in, and there is you know, revisions and iteration and a lot of feedback, and really just, I would say that the fundamental goal behind this model is helping kids understand themselves and their learning process and what a high bar of excellence is. And once you understand those three things, you're ready to take on a college class. You're ready to take on a job, in my opinion.
Courtney, that's perfectly said. And I think the key here is, I mean, I can speak to my own experience becoming really good at taking a test, but not knowing at all what the test is actually teaching, right? Because I've had many experiences where I can pass a test very well, but if you ask me what did I do, I have no idea, right? And that's something that comes through a lot of times where we train kids how to take tests. We do not train students how to think, right? And that is a massive issue, especially if you talk to college professors now. They will tell you that there are a huge number of students coming through that are not equipped for thought and for thinking and for actual inquiry. So that I think is a brilliant question, and one that is, I think, at the basis, the foundation for why we would use this approach and why this would be supportive. Courtney, while I've got you, would you mind answering the other question? And I think this is another brilliant question. And I'll read it out loud for everybody. It says about creating and maintaining the proper environment with an advisory class for middle school students. So Greenfield has an advisory class. Many of the middle schools already have advisory classes, is what it's called. During a parent shadow day early this year, we saw how this class period was basically a huge romp around, right? Where kids spend all their time socializing and interacting about everything except for school. It was pretty chaotic. There was no real advising going on, except perhaps to a few over lots of loud voices. How would we prevent advisory class becoming an animal house? I love that. So Courtney, how would you approach that question? Because I feel exactly the same way regarding what happens at many middle schools for advisory. It really is that. So how do you approach that, Courtney, that question?
Yeah, I mean, I think Wences and I would probably both have the same answer here. You like make advisory matter. And that takes a lot of shapes, right? And sometimes that means that you're doing one-on-one conversations and the rest of the scholars are study halling, you know, or working with each other, collaborating. Sometimes that means you're doing whole class projects. Sometimes that means you are goofing off and playing games because building community sometimes looks really loud and chaotic. But I would say that, you know, to answer the question as like bluntly as I can, like it's all about the relationships that the kids have with each other and with you. And if they respect you, they'll respect the advisory space. And if they respect each other, they'll respect the advisory space. Because suddenly, if you're in an advisory group, you've been with those kids for 2 years, you know that when Courtney is sitting down talking to Wences, they need some time to talk to each other because Wences needs support. And you're doing Wences and Courtney a disservice by being crazy, you know, or like being off task. So I think that it's all about building that community, building that conversation, and creating like an understanding amongst the kids of the value of advisory, right? We can sit as adults and talk about the value of advisory at length. And once we bring kids into that conversation too, it really becomes a space that has high value and that the kids recognize for having high value. And it's definitely a, you know, a day by day work in progress. It's not just like there's a quick answer for that. It's a difficult question. Some days my classroom looks like a romp around, and sometimes it looks really diligent and focused. But I think that, you know, it really does come down to having a purpose for advisory. If that purpose is internships, if that purpose is academic support, if that purpose is building community, just starting off the day with like, here's why we're here.
I think to lead off that, Courtney, a little bit more, and to go over the question that Linda posed there, I think a big part of it also has to do with the amount of time that you have in advisory. And if you look at how Greenfield structure is set up in the other middle schools within our district, it's 50 minutes, 51 minutes, which means in reality, it's about 25-ish minutes that students actually get to have an advisory type class, which is very, very short. So I know, and Wences, if you can talk to this also, what is the importance of having time in that advisory? Why is that important? So that what would you say on that with regards to the time frame of advisory?
Yeah, so one thing that I want to get across is that you're not eliminating the old model or the traditional teaching. What you're doing is you're enhancing every single aspect of it, and you're putting it at its maximum potential. So the perfect thing for that this was brought up, because today we went over our new schedule for distance learning. We went from an advisory going from 90 minutes a day to 25, 30 minutes a day every morning. And a lot of my scholars were just like, I need you to just listen to me, just talk about this one thing. I need your feedback on this. And their needs weren't being met. So now I took a little survey, did a Padlet survey, and I asked them, what do you guys want in your schedule? Because we're going to come up with our new schedule collectively. And I looked at all the responses, and today we went over the schedule. And it was with their input. And we modified it so that they own it. So now they're accountable for it. And the structure is there. And like Courtney said, it could look like we're just playing a game, but it could have been right after a very stressful unit exam. It could have been after this 1,000-word essay, you know, where they just stressed out and they really worked hard on it. But you structure it in such a way where it's kind of seamless, and the scholars don't notice that you're just guiding them throughout this whole like bobsled type downhill thing. And our schedule like this, starting next week, is going to be the first day is we're playing this game called Boom Clack. The second one is the healthcare card, or the health card, I'm sorry, which is like their PE. I'm giving them some time to do that. And then on Wednesdays is we do a community circle, and Thursdays is a mini study hall session. And Fridays is we're working on a project. Right now we're writing stories about a picture that I give them. But they all had that input. So in order for me to get there though, I had to ask them a ton of questions this last month. So I was just bombarding them with things to do. And then whatever they were really interested in, that's when I started picking at that thread. And now we developed a schedule that they didn't like the other games that we came up with and the other activities. But now I can fill those spots, and we can structure it in such a way where they now are the sole owners of that. And it helps with that whole chaotic, like I've been into these advisories, not in this particular school, where it's like half of them are on their phone, the other half are trying to get out the window, right? And they're not doing anything. No matter how long you spend in that class, they could have 2 hours in that class and they still won't do anything. The relationship, the structure, the accountability piece, and the warmth that you have with them, the compassion, speaks volumes into them. They're not dumb. Scholars are not dumb. They know how to play the system. They know how to be part of the system as well. And testing doesn't go out the door. It just means that now a test is not just a test. It's something where they can demonstrate their growth. And if they fail miserably, now that's perfect. You failed. That we celebrate it because now you have the opportunity to grow. But you are going to somehow retake that assessment in a different form maybe, but you're going to demonstrate your growth and the progression that you've made.
So if I can summarize that for Linda's question, and also for maybe Edith, that this is partly goes to both, right, is at the foundation of all of this is that relationship that you're able to build with the students. And because of that, your advisory can be very productive, right? And in determining the structures for the advisory, the relationship that you created with that student allows for students to have input with regards to how that structure is managed, which by doing that creates motivation and creates students who actually want to be a part of what's going on, right? So it's a circle of understanding that I think comes right back to that relationship that you spent so much time, and Wences was talking to this, he spent a full month ahead of time developing out that relationship to ensure that the advisory model, when it goes to this distance learning platform, which they started, would be a success. And I think that's the key there, is that there's time put into making this work and time put into making sure that the relationship's built. And I think that was beautifully put. Thank you. I'm going to go on and share a few more things, and then I just want to make sure that we have some time for some more questions and needs that they come up. It's already 8 o'clock, and if it's up to me, I'll be going on this conversation for another 3 hours because I love it. So I will do my best to, to jump into some more things. Okay. So just as a repeat and sort of a assuming of the main ideas, it's really looking at different styles of thinking. And I think, you know, if you look at how we message it so far, there's 5 main thoughts. And right, the first one is empirical reasoning, right? How we think about the world, the different styles of thinking. Quantitative reasoning, which generally when you think about mathematics, you think about creating structures and estimations and being able to really think about formulations within not only your own economy, but looking out into the world. Communication, how do you take in and express ideas? Social reasoning, what are others' perspectives? How do we approach this? Which is especially, you know, I think relevant when we think about the name of this charter, which is Bostonia Global, right? Being able to understand on a global perspective, being able to understand students from around the world. And then personal qualities, what do I bring to this process? And I think the beauty of the conversation with both Wences and Courtney and what we can hear is that so much of their work is put into that personal relationship and allowing students to bring out the personal qualities into the world around them. And when I think about each of your children, they're each unique. And I think that's the key here is we can't treat students like an average. We can't treat them like a number that we just have one, let's say, guidance counselor meet with them maybe twice in the entire high school career and say, hey, that conversation is what allows you to go into college. It doesn't work. We have to make sure that students have people who know them, who care about them, and are really able to be there for them. So I just wanted to go into a little bit more of a discussion on this and just encourage parents just to be a part of this. But the main question here is, how would a competency-based education support student growth? And how would this style of thinking create deeper understandings of content education? And really with that, and the main question there is, how would this support our students' education? So as parents right now just hearing this, let's make this our breakout session between us, right? We don't have to go out somewhere. Just as parents, what are your thoughts on this? This was a big idea, concept. And each time we have conversations, we're going to go more and more in depth into it. What I'll do our next meeting is I'll share with you from both Odyssey STEM as well as a few other schools, just their curriculum, so you can see just the way they approach competency-based education within a classroom, which I think will be helpful also in seeing the thought process there. But I just wanted to see any questions or any understandings that you're coming through right now based on this, and any just immediate reactions to this in terms of what you've heard tonight with regards to competencies. Kennedy, the question was, are there any stats or studies that we're of that can give us an idea of how big picture studies are doing in college, or students, I'm sorry, specifically how many stay in college through graduation despite learning in different environments and lecture hall learning? As far as I know, there are quite a few studies. I have a few of those on hand, and I can share those with you if you'd like, no problem. And what I could do, maybe if it's helpful for the team, would you like me just to put that on the newsletter, and we can just add that in under the action teams, and then maybe everybody can have access to that. That's definitely something that is a big part of what we think about. We want to think not just now, but we want to think of 10, 15 years in the future, and really think through what we're doing in terms of how that's going to be successful for students. When we think about the 13-14 component of this design layout, right, we want to think also about how can we make sure that when students graduate, that they're ready to go in terms of anything that they want to do. And so that's something that is really important. Linda, bringing in, so it sounds like the success of advisory relies on a great advisor, which is similar to a great math class, relying on a great math teacher, and so on and so forth. What happens when the advisor struggles or cannot get students to buy in? Ooh, that's a good question. Courtney Winslow, I'll leave that one to you. What are your thoughts on that? That's, I think, a good question because, you know, it'll come up, obviously, right? So what are your thoughts, Courtney, on that in terms of what happens when an advisor struggles or cannot get students to buy in? What does that look like? Have you experienced that in your model?
Yeah. Winston took his mic off really fast, so I'm going to let him start.
Okay.
Oh, how convenient.
He was ready. He was like, I'm ready to talk about this.
Yeah. Oh, thanks. Yeah, that's a difficult one, but I've seen it, and I hate to say it, but it's actually kind of fun because you get to, like, as a teacher, you're like, oh man, I'm not that bad, sweet. But then also, like, the scholar gets the benefit of seeing reality. Like, things can hit the fan, and what do you do then? And the wonderful thing is that if you are secure enough, and it takes some time, you can rely and gather your resources and try different things. It's a scary model. So like I said, we've been doing distance learning for a month now, a little bit over a month. And I was just like just gathering data. And some of those were like, I ran an activity and it was like, everybody just stared at me like, what? Like, oh man, this is so stupid. And okay, cool. So you're failing quite often sometimes. But the great thing is that now you're able to grow with the scholar. And something that's worthwhile, the old adage is that it's worth working for. And that's what they get to see. You were very patient with me. Remember when I basically told you to hit the road and you stood there by me? And they see that eventually, if you don't give up, then they'll see that part of it. Like, hey, I'm worth fighting for, and I'm worth you pulling your hair out to try to get me to buy in. And that's the important part where your colleagues they come in and they're like, yeah, don't give up. It's just around the corner. You're going to see it. You're going to see it. You're going to see it. And sooner or later, if the advisor really, really does care enough about that, they will see that. Now, it might not be like through the roof, like, oh, it's amazing, but it's going to be little wins. And sooner or later they add up. And you just have to keep trying. You know, it's that simple.
And I think Wences with that, and this, Linda, I think is my belief as a whole, is that good teachers are not always, how would I say this in the best way? A lot of times good teachers are a product of the culture, right? And the culture of the school and how that school is designed. So Bostonia is a wonderful school because of the culture at that school and the culture designed not only by the parents, but the students and the teachers, right? And to be a part of that environment, you rise to the occasion and you become a part of that culture. And there really isn't a lot of wiggle room to not be a part of that culture, right? And that's something that I think Wences and Courtney can talk to about Odyssey STEM, is that the culture there is about students and is about understanding them. And there's a lot of support to make sure that that is success, right? And how we approach it. Courtney, what else might you add to that, or any thoughts with regards to the buy-in and how we approach that?
Yeah, I mean, Wences was spot on, as I knew he would be. That's why I asked him to go first. Right, we have to not give up, right? There's no such thing as inherently good teachers and bad teachers. There's no such thing as inherently good kids and bad kids. There's no such thing as smart and not smart. right? And especially within this model, you start to realize that when given opportunities to express their full potential, kids rise to the occasion, and so do teachers. And as long as Narelle was pointing out, like, you keep values of transparency, right? I'm going to show you what I'm doing, even when it sucks. Vulnerability, I know I'm going to suck, so I have to talk about it. And humility, when I'm successful, I want to own that success and I want to keep going. Like, when you establish those values at the base for kids and for teachers, magical things happen. There are good days, there are bad days, right? Some days I'm like, I wouldn't want to be taught by me, and other days I wish I could be a kid in my class. And I think that to buy in takes that relentless practice, that transparency, that vulnerability, and that humility.
That was beautifully said. Thank you. I'm glad this is recorded. Javier, I love that. I'm going to blame Linda. I'll talk to her tomorrow. That's a great point. All right, well, I wanted to continue then on to just a couple other things. Courtney and Wences, if you need to get going, no problem. I just want to say from all of us, we're so thankful for your time with us tonight. That was really, really helpful. Please, parents, Courtney and Wences are really just, this was completely voluntary. They did this out of the goodness of their hearts. And so let me know if you have any questions or anything their way, and I'll make sure to get that to them. But we're all a team in this. And I think that's something that is beautiful in this type of thinking, is we're not in different platforms, right? We're not educators doing our own thing. We're all working in this together. And that's where it's really, having them as part of this conversation has been really helpful. So thank you. I appreciate your time with us tonight. So parents, I wanted to go on to the action teams. And this is, I think, a very important part in moving forward. And I've been racking my head in terms of how we can really get going on this, because it's very difficult to do action teams in a digital platform, right? But it's doable. So I just wanted to think through some ideas with you and share some thoughts on what that could be, and then get going on that. And so Ms. Bowden was asking regarding what are the next steps? How do we make sure things are moving forward? What does that look like? What's already been done? All of that. And I'm dying to get going on that with you. And it's been difficult with the digital platform. But here's my thought. Let's move forward. So a couple of things just to be aware of. The first one is on the slide deck. If you haven't done this already, please do so. The action teams, I just linked it in. This is an action team document that will help me a lot with thinking through what you want to do and what your passions are. So if you could write in your student name, current grade level. If you have parents who have passions about the school, share this with them. All this can be texted or emailed to one another. These are the main things that parents were interested in, right, as of yet. And those were the schedule of the day, horario del día, right, integration of different grade levels. What does that look like? Community inventory, right? What is it in our community that we can start connecting with? Who can we start connecting with? ELD, SLD integration, how can we approach that? Sports, deportes, what might that look like? What do we want it to be? Where do we want it in high school or middle school? What do we want it to feel like? Elective choices, personalization, drop-offs, dismissal procedures. And then in there too, I put in a little bit about, any current questions you have, any questions about this current year. And then of course, if you need any support with Zoom, I'm more than willing to help out. We have a lot of supports there that are available. When I sent the survey out 2 weeks ago, I did get quite a few responses back. And it did look like the majority of parents, these were the areas that they were interested in. The majority being about sports and deportes, which is great. But then there were other ones just, throughout it all. So my thought in terms of moving forward is to go ahead and just schedule Zoom meetings that parents can jump in on if they're interested, rather than just waiting for people to connect on it. I'm just going to go ahead and just schedule in meetings ahead of time on timeframes. And then as parents, if you're interested in joining in on that meeting and having a discussion with me, go for it. And then you can connect with me. So the idea would be, the schedule of the day. We would hold that this coming Monday in the morning. The integration of different grade levels, we do Tuesday in the morning. Community inventory on Wednesday at some point. ELD, SLD integration Thursdays. Sports Friday. Electives Monday in the afternoon. Drop-offs Tuesday in the afternoon, something like that. I'm going to jump off the screen share because I want to know your feedback on this. What are your thoughts on that? Would that be helpful? because what we really want to do is exactly what has been brought up, is we need to start sharing ideas as parents together and get this developed out. The main concern I have right now, to be honest, and where I'm at in terms of what I'm working through, are two things. One is it's the schedule today. Obviously, we want to make sure that what kids are doing the day is really valuable. But the other thing is I want to have to find out here pretty soon what time we're starting the day and what time we're ending the day. That's going to be very important, especially for us as parents who have multiple kids at the school site, right? And some who are, let's say, in let's say 5th grade next year and one who's in 8th grade, right? We don't want to have too much of a lag between, start times and end times. So that would be something that would be really helpful in terms of thinking through. To be perfectly honest, I could give my opinion, but ultimately I'm not the parent, right? And it's you who's the one who's going to have to work through that. So it makes a whole lot more sense to have parents be the ones who say, you know what, this is going to work best for us, and then we design around that. So that would be my idea for all of you. What are your thoughts in terms of just go ahead and say, here's when we're having this action team meeting. If you want to join in, join in. Would that be helpful to all of you? Is that a yes? Yeah? Okay. All right, perfect. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And the way I'll set it up is on the bulletin. I'm trying to make it very much my consistent language with everybody, that when they ask me a question, I say, well, on the newsletter, on the bulletin, to make sure that everybody goes back to that. So on the newsletter, I'll have everything listed there for next week under the action team area. And that'll be something that'll list when the next meeting is and for what. And then you can join in on that meeting if you're interested in. If you have friends or other, whatever, family friends or people that you know at the school who you have had conversations with, who have voiced an opinion of, you know what, I'd really like to be a part of this discussion on whatever this is, please invite them. It's difficult to create communication for everybody that's successful, but we do our best. So just let me know if you have anybody that you would like to be a part of that as well. Just a couple of other things just to share with you, and then I promise we'll get going. Great question from Raquel. I'm going to say this to everybody at the same time. On the newsletter, you'll find the times for everything. So it's going to be on the newsletter. I'll be putting that in tomorrow, and you'll be able to see the times for things. If for some reason the timeframes that I'm giving out are horrible for you as parents, be honest and let me know and say that's a joke. We can't meet at this time. Are the meetings going to be in the morning? I'm going to try to do meetings in the morning and in the afternoon. Some will be just based on my day, which tends to be pretty full, but I will do my best to have both options available for different things. Does that sound good? All right, so a couple other things just to make sure we're on the same page on. I'm going to jump into this. Heads up. So next meeting that we have is on May 7th, I believe. And that's going to be on internships, world of work, life opportunities, and the idea behind how do we create this within the middle school environment, and then what does that look like possibly in the high school environment. And this is a very exciting part of all of this, is the ability for kids to take their learnings into the world. We want our students to have real world applications and really understand that what they're learning is truly valuable. So that's something that is available for next week. And just a reminder as well then that next meeting is May 7th, but we'll be having action team meetings next week in the meantime, in which case we'll be able to go through any other questions you may have. So, all right, I just talked to you for a full hour and a half. Great. So any questions right now, any main concerns, this is time for you. And if not, then I really appreciate your time. You can get going, and I really, really am thankful for all that you're doing. But I'm going to wait on here just for a little longer in case any other questions come up or any concerns. I definitely want to make sure I give you time.
Okay, I just had a question, Narao. Yes. I was seeing that I guess a few pillars of this new concept and I guess the charter of what you're talking about involves a lot of collaboration with students and the teachers, and I think that's great because that's something that's very it's a competency that we use at our work now, where it's an important concept because typically when you get out into the real world, it's all about teamwork and collaborating, sharing ideas with one another and coming to an agreement upon those ideas. So I did enjoy the fact that it looks like the future is more collaborative between both faculty and the students. So I really think that's super important.
Yeah, that's a great point you bring up. If we look at jobs, thinking about the future, right, and thinking about future jobs that are available to our kids, the majority of those jobs will need collaborative people, right? And people who are able to communicate and able to do that in an effective manner. It seems that there's less and less of a focus on people who can plug and chug numbers, right? Because we have a lot of supports in that realm now, right? And more people who can think quickly, analyze, be critical, and create a lot of different fast, connections between things. And that seems to be what we're looking for. So, we have the opportunity now to backwards plan all the way from college down to TK, right? And so what we can start doing is based on those main, job sector needs, when we think down the road, we can start already applying that to our little ones and start thinking about how are they collaborating? What is their way of thinking? What are their empirical reasonings? All of that. And that's something that as this develops out is something that we can, start earlier and earlier and earlier. One thing I just want to make clear throughout all of this is the conversation tonight is focused on the middle school next year, right? And I do want to make that clear. A lot of the conversations that we're having is for that first and then for the eventual high school. It would be a dream to then start backwards, planning that into the elementary, right? Because it all fits beautifully together. But for next year, the focus would be competency-based education in middle school, and then let's see how we can go downwards from there, right? So that would be the idea.
I have a question.
Yes.
We're getting grant money, right? This big picture learning is kind of like a Bill Gates money thing. Because we're under the district, is that money allocated just for our school within the district? Or is the rest of the district going to be able to tap into those funds? I mean, not to sound like greedy, but
I get it.
We're taking a big risk as parents, right? Because this is also very brand new.
Right.
And we will need a lot of resources as far as advisors, there's a lot more coming. So is that a stipulation, getting or receiving this grant money, that it goes strictly to Bostonia Global and not the rest of the schools within the district?
Yeah, no, that's a wonderful question, and one that I feel very strongly about, being the person wanting it, right? So it's not greedy, it's being smart. It's saying you want, right? So the specific grant money that I wrote for that that new venture grant would be coming towards this opportunity, right? And that's what that money is for. The other example is new charter funds, right? So if we go to the state and the signatures, all that comes through from the charter, there is new charter funds that are made available by the state as well, right? And I'm also applying for multiple other grants that are specifically for this school development, right? So what you're bringing up is a very crucial point, and that is funds need to be made available to make this successful, and I agree with that.
So, but is there going to be something in writing? Because honestly, David, our superintendent, I where funds are allocated now and where funds are spent now, I don't always agree with on how that's distributed and allocated. But is there something that you have that's going to protect Bostonia Global? Something in writing, something that's saying, look, these funds will be distributed to our school only?
So I know for that grant specifically, and I can talk to that one, okay? Because that was the one I was a big part of.
Right.
The writing of that grant is, there's accountability measures that are placed within the grant. So when we were going through all of the interview processes for that grant, they specifically want to know how it's being used for this school, right? And so that has to be what that grant money is used for. And they hold that very accountable to what that's being used. So I was very specific in for this, whatever it may be, right? So that is, I think, as accountable as I can make it, is the people who are giving the money are wanting to know exactly where it's going. right? And so for that grant, I can do it. You know, in terms of state funds and other things like that, right, that goes to a district level. And that would be something that goes beyond, you know, approval to our board, right? And then also is distributed, you know, where it goes. So I don't have the answer to that, but I do have the answer with regards to anything that I've done, which was that specific grant.
Okay.
Yeah. One thing I can say, which is valuable in this, is, you know, David's been a big part of this school project, right, and working through that. So, you know, as far as I understand, he's very much behind everything we're doing, and really a proponent in making this successful, because the reality is we want to create something within Cajon Valley that's going to be long lasting, right, and effective and successful, and really an ability to shine, right, what we do here. So this idea would be a culmination of a lot of dreaming, right, and a lot of thoughts together in one location.
Mr. Winter, I have a question. Just to follow up to the last question she had, we are, you know, besides the funds, we are going to have the district support through everything, right? It's not just, I mean, are they going to be like helping us out and giving us whatever resources we need to accomplish our goals?
As far as I understand, as much as they're able to, right? And that's, I think, you know, what I expect and what I hope, right? And from the conversations I've had with the district, they're very much excited about the project and been a huge support in terms of everything that I've been doing. So I've had a lot of conversations with, you know, David, and working through these different ideas and making sure that it's as successful as we can make it. Part of it too is we have to redesign how we approach, you know, from a school leader point of view, right? How I look at funding, right? And a part of it, you know, as parents, you've been really helpful and involved with PTA, right? And then helping with that. And a part of what I've been talking with the PTA on is we really want to start moving towards corporations, right? And moving towards companies and other people who can be, you know, partners with us, and thinking about, you know, supports in that way as well. So luckily we have a lot of connections, right? As a school district, we have a lot of people who are supporting what we're trying to do, right? But it's also, we want to make sure that it's done wisely and with, I think effectiveness is the best way to put that.
Thank you.
Oh, of course, of course. See. I'm good at awkward pauses, so I'll hold on. Here we go. Linda, or Javier. In some discussions videos about advisor-student discussions and building relationship, there is no mention about the topics going from school into personal subject. Will there be standards or boundary criteria established about the topics that can be asked versus what crossing the line or being off limits? Oof, I wish we had that question with the two advisors here, because they answered that one really well last time. It's always a fine line, right? And even as teachers, right, who aren't advisors currently, it's a fine line. Maybe Tom, you can speak to this as a teacher currently. How do you approach, you know, boundaries, and what does that look like? And you know, as advisors, you know, what can that be in terms of how do you judge, you know, when is the boundary and what that looks like?
That's an excellent question. Part of it is based on my comfort level. Part of it is based on being a parent myself and knowing there are some questions, values-based questions always need to be asked or answered by the parent. Something that's right, something that's wrong. That's not something that I feel I'd like to answer it for the student, because I always want what I believe to be right, what everyone believes to be right. But that's a family decision. Facts, I always feel like if I know specific facts about something, then that's not crossing a line. It gets tricky, you know, politics and religion and all these things. I don't, there are a lot of lines that we don't go across. But in terms of, if a student has a question, if I can give them the facts on that question and then refer them back to the parents, if it's something that I think is if I'm concerned for a student because of the question they ask, I may go ahead and refer them to counseling, or I may contact the parents and say, hey, your child asked this question in class today. I think it's a great question, but I think it's something that you should talk about at home rather than something we discuss as a class at school. So it depends on what comes up. It depends on if it's age appropriate for middle schoolers. Being in middle school, hearing the kids talk, it's not that difficult to determine developmentally where they're at and what they're ready for in terms of information. And if they're asking for information, again, if it's developmentally not necessarily appropriate, I'm going to refer it to the parents or the counselor. If it's appropriate for the students and it falls into the scope of what they're going to be hearing about information or misinformation out on campus, then I'm happy to give the students the straight scoop on their questions. That's, I think, the best I can do on that answer.
A famous answer to that question from teachers, right, is this would be a really good conversation to have with your parents. That was all the time something that I say too, right, as a principal is there's lines that you have to just be careful of, right? Middle schoolers, it's still that they're still pretty babyish in a lot of the ways they think, right? However, in the world they're in, they're exposed to pretty mature things, right? And so that's something where it's unfortunate, but it's also something that as teachers and advisors, we have to be able to draw lines of support. So I think, Javier, the best way to answer that question is it's really based on how to support the students best, right? With the idea being that the relationship allows students to feel secure and comfortable and happy, but it also allows it if something comes through that we can be supportive. And then with that, how differing standards, views, and opinions, that really comes down to the leadership of how the leaders of the school define that, right? So that's a conversation that is continuously worked through. And as the leader, I would be the one who would be very, much setting the standard as to what that is, right? And so that's where you create consistency, right? And that's where you want to make sure that it's very much about creating relationships, understanding students, understanding what that looks like, but being wise in what that is, right? So like Tom's mentioning, questions on religion, questions on different situations, all of that will be questions that middle schoolers will bring up, guaranteed, right? So you can have a good discussion about that. It can be really strong and wonderful and effective, but it also has to be done with, a little bit of being wise in how you choose your language and your words. Good question.
To follow up on that, I was curious, as a parent, do we have any say if we think, maybe a relationship or topics or anything like that are being discussed or perhaps uncomfortable? Do we have any options to maybe, what are the steps if we aren't comfortable with anything as far as the advisor and our child? Do we have options? What's the protocol? It seems like it's just, we haven't really talked about that really.
Yeah, no problem. I think, it's pretty similar to right now. So let's say that you had an issue with a teacher, what would be your steps, right? You would talk to the teacher, right? That would probably be step one, right? And likely after that, you'd talk to the principal, right? And work with me. And then likely we'd have a conversation working through the actual situation. From there, we would try to come through some sort of resolution or figuring out what exactly is the problem and working through that. And if it can't be solved, then we look at other options, right? And so it's exactly the same idea, right? And we would have a big enough school population next year that we would be able to have, and definitely by the time your child goes up to it, we will have a much larger population. So that'll be a lot of options available, but it's really, the idea around it is we want to start developing a culture of understanding and a culture about getting to know each other, and a culture about really caring about kids and caring about their needs and caring about their learning, right? And that's really the whole idea in all of this. And obviously if there's an issue or something like that is going on, then if we care about our kids and care about their learning, then we would value that issue, right? So it just all comes together in terms of that's okay, right? We have to work through that and work through a solution. Yeah, that's a great question. And really the beauty of these questions is that I guarantee you there's at least 100 other parents that have the exact same question, right? So this video is recorded, so please keep asking, because I know that other parents will have questions along these lines, and I'll just share this with everyone and they can see the answers that we're giving. Off topic, I would like to recommend for the WOW meeting to propose a profile for our kids. These can give our kids a better view. That's cool. Yeah, I like that. I will share that. That's a great idea.
Okay, thanks. I know like there's employers actually have you take this test for adults.
Yeah.
Kind of have you taken one?
No, I've not. No.
But I think it would be a really good strategy. I know, I'm sorry, this is off topic.
This segues into something that is not off topic, so great.
Okay, because I feel like the younger, I know we are changing over time within age and stuff, but I feel like the younger we kind of figure out what our personality type is, and typically your personality type doesn't really change a whole lot within your time. It would kind of give the kids like an explanation like, oh, that's why I like to learn this way, or it kind of just gives you an idea of how you perceive social or collaborative work from others, or you know what I mean, like the personality types.
I love that. So one thing I've been playing around with for next year, especially in the middle school, but you know, eventually, hopefully in the elementary as well, would be to basically at the end of every year, teachers go through all of the cards of the kids, right? And then it's basically this massive amount of work put into place into thinking about classes for the next year, right? And it's always this huge thing. Teachers have arguments about who would be in the best place, all of this sort of thing, and we try to figure out what's going to be the most effective creation for the next year in terms of classes. What I was thinking for the middle school next year is we do as a district have a strong relationship with Myers-Briggs. And something that I was thinking about would be creating a Myers-Briggs profile for every single one of our incoming middle school students, and then creating classes based on that, right? Where students are able to be paired in with other students that are compatible, that are, you know, able to build relationships and connections with, in terms of, you know, like work profiles. And then we'd also collaborate that onto RIASEC, which is what the Myers-Briggs company is trying to do with us right now, is creating that connection. So, you know, that profile with regards to trying to figure out our students and trying to figure out what their learning styles are and all of that, I think is huge. And I'm totally into the idea. And it's something that, weirdly enough, isn't going on in education yet. We do that in the workforce.
Right. That's what I didn't understand too. Yeah.
In education, and it really doesn't make sense. So this would be we would be completely unique if we were to be doing that. And I'm 100% into it. So I brought this up to Ed Hidalgo earlier, and he's all about it too. So just thinking about, you know, what can we do in terms of really,
and not only just catering to, oh, this personality would match with this personality, but kind of giving that challenge that, you know, to bounce off, to know how to collaborate with somebody that doesn't necessarily meet your personality.
Exactly. And that's part of it is, you know, when we think about RIASEC, you know, traits, right? And that's, you know, the district language in this, is there are certain types of students that work really well in certain situations and others that don't. Right? I know for myself and my wife, right? That's a good example. She's very opposite of me. I'm big time in the clouds dreamer, and she's very realistic and very, right? And so it frustrates her like crazy when I'm just like, what about this? What about this idea, right? She wants points right now. And that's the same thing with our students, is learning about each other and our thinking strategies and our learning styles. That really is valuable in terms of what's next and what can we do to collaborate with each other. And the earlier that they learn how to do that, imagine once they get into a workforce scenario, they're good to go. They understand that, they get it, they have the language, they really would be way more successful than others.
Yeah, agreed. Okay, sorry, off topic.
Oh, that's a great point. So I love that. So just to review then a couple of things, and then I better go get some dinner. So a couple of things is, one, next week we'll have our next action team meetings tomorrow. Expect on the newsletter, and I'll also do as an all-call email to everyone, just the time frames and Zoom, whatever they're called, the links for our action team meetings. If when I send those out, there are other areas that you really think would be valuable to work on. Another example, just to throw it off in the world, is the design of the school itself, right? The design of next year in the middle school, what do you want it to look like, all those different components. I'm been working through that. That's a big part of, when you're talking about what are you working through, that's a big one, right? So, furniture and colors and all those sort of things, we want to have that design, and I can share with you everything I'm working on currently. So that's an idea. Other examples of things that we can talk through together as teams. But let me know your thoughts. Let me know if there's anything else that you feel would be valuable to spend time on together. So, alrighty. I'm going to go ahead and stop recording here.